Welcome back to Coffee with Giants, the podcast where we sit down with the greatest minds in history and ask them questions that still matter today. Last episode we explored suffering with Dostoevsky. Today we're shifting the tone a little. Instead of asking why life hurts, we're asking a different question. What does it actually mean to live a good life? Because today we hear many different answers. Some say happiness is pleasure, others say it's success. Others say it's money, recognition, or freedom. But more than 2,000 years ago, one philosopher proposed something different, something deeper. He believed happiness wasn't something you chase, it's something you become. Today, sitting across from me is the philosopher who taught this idea to the Western world, Aristotle. Aristotle, welcome to Coffee with Giants. Let's start at the beginning. You didn't grow up in Athens like many of the famous philosophers. You were actually born in northern Greece, in a small city called Stagira. And yet at 17 years old, you travelled to Athens to study at Plato's Academy, the most famous intellectual centre in the ancient world. What was that like?
Plato had already established a remarkable place of learning. Students debated mathematics, politics, ethics, metaphysics, every possible subject. For nearly 20 years I studied there. Plato was not merely a teacher, he was a model of intellectual curiosity. But over time, I began to develop my own way of thinking. Plato believed that the highest truths existed in abstract forms, perfect realities beyond the physical world. I became more interested in the world we actually inhabit.
So instead of starting with abstract theories, you started with observation.
Exactly. If we want to understand the good life, we must look carefully at human life itself.
One of the most fascinating parts of your life is that you later became the tutor of a young prince, someone who would eventually become one of history's most famous conquerors, Alexander the Great. What was it like teaching someone who would one day rule such a vast empire?
Alexander was exceptionally curious. He was not satisfied with simple answers. He wanted to understand the world, its geography, its cultures, its sciences. I tried to teach him that true greatness is not merely power, it's wisdom. A ruler who lacks wisdom is able to conquer cities, but he cannot build a fair society.
That's interesting, because today many people associate success with power or achievement, but you seemed much more concerned with character.
Yes, because character determines how power is used.
Let's talk about your most famous idea. In your writings, especially in the Nicomachean Ethics, you talk about something called Eudaimonia. Today, people usually translate this word as happiness, but it seems to mean something deeper than that. What did you actually mean by it?
Yes, the word is often translated as happiness, but that translation is misleading. Many people today think happiness is simply a feeling, a pleasant emotional state. But feelings are temporary. Pleasure comes and goes. Eudaimonia is something more enduring. It's the condition of living well, of flourishing as a human being. This emerges when a person is in accordance with their highest capacities: reason, virtue, friendship, and meaningful activity.
So happiness isn't something we chase directly. It's more like the result of living well.
Precisely. If someone spends their entire life chasing pleasure, they often end up dissatisfied. But if someone focuses on developing their character and living virtuously, happiness tends to emerge as a natural consequence.
One of your most famous ideas is the concept of virtue as a balance between extremes. You called it the golden mean. Can you explain that?
Certainly. Virtue often lies between two opposing vices. Take courage, for example. If someone has too little courage, they become cowardly. But if someone has too much courage without wisdom, they become reckless. True courage lies between those two extremes. The same is true for many virtues. Generosity lies between greed and wastefulness. Confidence lies between insecurity and arrogance. Living well requires learning how to find this balance.
That sounds surprisingly modern. Today, people often swing between extremes. working too much or avoiding responsibility entirely, being overly confident or deeply insecure.
Yes, human beings have always struggled with balance. This is why virtue must be cultivated through habit. We become just by practicing justice. We become courageous by practicing courage. Character is formed through repeated actions.
If someone listening today feels lost, chasing success, pleasure, and recognition, but still feeling unsatisfied, what would you say to them?
I would remind them that a good life cannot be built on external rewards alone. Money, status, and comfort are not meaningless, but they are not the foundation of happiness. A fulfilling life is built on deeper things: friendship, purpose, moral character, the cultivation of the mind. When these elements are present, a person begins to flourish. And that flourishing is what I meant by eudaimonia.
Aristotle reminds us that happiness isn't something we stumble upon by accident. It's something we build through our choices, our habits, and the kind of people we become. Thank you for joining us for another conversation on Coffee with Giants. And as Aristotle once wrote, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Until next time, keep learning from the giants.